Sometimes miracles don't come from magic or luck. They come from the simple, unshakable belief of a child. In a small village where the sun scorched the earth and the rains had long forgotten us, hope seemed to dry up, along with the crops. Each day grew hotter, each night drier. The fields that once fed us now cracked beneath our feet. As days passed, the people in our village grew weary and silent, their eyes fixed on the ground. They were too afraid to look up at the fields because they knew what awaited them: hardship, hunger, and the struggle to survive. Next to my home lived a farmer and his family. They didn't have much, just a small plot of land and each other. But in that tiny home, they had a warmth, a love that seemed to keep them going, no matter how harsh life became. You could feel that love radiating from their family, even in the hardest of times. They had a little daughter, just 6 years old. She was like a tiny spark of joy in the midst of all that despair. Every time I saw her, she was smiling, her eyes full of wonder and hope, as if the world around her was still bright and beautiful. Somehow, no hardship could darken her spirit. There was something almost magical about her, like she had her own sunshine that nothing could take away. Her father, though, he was a good man, strong and kind. But these days I could see the weight he carried. Every day he was out there, staring at his withered crops, his hands rough from the earth, his face lined with worry. He tried to stay strong for his wife and his daughter, but as hard as he worked to hold on to hope, I could see it slipping from his eyes. The fear of losing everything, the fear of not being able to protect his family. Every time he looked at his little girl, you could see the conflict in his heart. He wanted to believe that things would turn around, but the truth was, he was afraid that he couldn't shield his daughter from the reality they were facing. And yet, somehow, in the face of all that, he managed a smile, a laugh, or a kind word for her, hiding his own fears just so she could keep that spark of joy alive. It was almost heartbreaking to watch. This little girl, so full of faith, and her father, trying his best to stay strong for her, even when he himself was struggling to hold on to hope. The drought had worn down even the strongest among us. There was nothing left to do, no work left that could bring relief. And so, as desperation grew, the entire village came to a silent, unspoken decision. We would pray, together, at the same time. Our last resort was to lift our hearts to the sky and hope that somehow our voices would reach beyond the clouds and bring the rain we so desperately needed. No one knew if it would work. Most of them had doubts, even if they didn't speak them aloud. But they had run out of other options. And so, they gathered, each family in their own home, each voice murmuring prayers that rose and mingled, like a soft, desperate chant that filled the village. It was as if they were offering their final shred of hope to the heavens, placing it in hands they couldn't see, trusting that somehow it would be enough. From my own window, I watched the family next door, the farmer, his wife, and their little girl. The father was kneeling on the floor, his head bowed, hands clasped tightly together, as if he were holding on to hope itself. His wife knelt beside him, her face lined with quiet strength, though her eyes were full of worry. And then there was the little girl, sitting between them, her small hands pressed together in prayer, her eyes closed, her face lit up with a pure, unbreakable faith. In that moment, I could almost feel the power of her belief. She wasn't just hoping, she was certain. To her, there was no question. Rain would come. She asked for only one thing, for the rain to come and save her family, her village, her father's beloved fields. It was a beautiful, heartbreaking sight. This family, side by side, pouring their hearts into silent prayers, hoping against hope for a miracle. As the family finished their prayer, the farmer rose to his feet, ready to return to his field to check on what was left of his crops. But just as he was leaving, I saw his little girl dash into the house. A moment later, she came back out, clutching an old umbrella in her tiny hand. It stopped me in my tracks. I watched her with a mix of confusion and surprise. Here we were, standing under a blazing sun, the air so hot it felt like it could sear the skin. And yet, there she was, carrying an umbrella as if a storm was about to break any moment. I couldn't help but wonder, why would she need an umbrella in this scorching heat? Then it struck me. She believed. She believed so deeply, so purely, that her prayer had already been answered. To her, the rain was on its way. There was no doubt in her heart, no hesitation. That old umbrella wasn't just a tool to shield from the rain. To her, it was a promise, a symbol of the miracle she was certain would come. In that moment, I realized something that filled me with both wonder and humility. This little girl, in her innocent faith, had shown us what it truly meant to believe. She didn't just hope for the rain, she was prepared for it. She was ready, not because of a forecast or a sign in the sky, but because her heart was full of unwavering trust. To her, that umbrella was more than just an umbrella. It was her way of saying, I know rain will come. I believe. And as I stood there, watching her, I felt something shift within me. A small, hesitant spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, she was right. As I stood there, watching that little girl clutch her umbrella, a wave of emotions washed over me. In that moment, I felt both humbled and inspired. I realized that she was teaching all of us something we had long forgotten, the power of true, unbreakable belief. Everyone in the village had prayed, yes. We all wanted to believe in the rain, in a miracle. But beneath those prayers, most of us were weighed down by doubts, worn thin by the struggle. We prayed because it was all we could do, but we didn't truly think it would change anything. But this little girl, she didn't just pray. She believed with every fiber of her being that the rain would come. There was no trace of doubt in her heart, no hesitation. She acted with a certainty that most of us adults had lost somewhere along the way. She didn't just hope, she trusted completely and deeply that her prayers would be answered. And that trust, that innocent conviction, gave her a strength that none of us had. I looked around at my neighbors, at their tired, weathered faces, and I realized this tiny child was the only one among us who truly understood faith. She was the only one who didn't let worry or fear cloud her heart. And in that, she held a kind of wisdom that none of us could match. Faith isn't just about asking. It's about believing so strongly that you're willing to act, even when everything around you says it's hopeless. It's about having the courage to prepare, to hold on, to move forward, even when there are no signs to reassure you. That's what this little girl showed us, the kind of faith that doesn't need proof, that doesn't wait for signs, the kind of faith that steps forward into the unknown, with trust as its only guide. In life, there will always be moments when doubt tries to overpower us, when fear and hardship make us question everything. But real faith is what keeps us standing, what makes us push forward, even when the road ahead is dark. True belief doesn't give up, even when it would be easier to let go. Watching her that day, with her small umbrella and her steadfast heart, I felt something shift within me. I realized that faith doesn't need to be grand or loud. Sometimes, it's a quiet strength that holds us steady in the storms. It's the courage to keep believing, even when everything else tells us not to. And that kind of faith, that's the kind of faith that can change lives, that can carry us through the darkest times. In that small, silent moment, she taught me, taught all of us, that real strength doesn't come from what we see or touch. It comes from the quiet, unshakable belief in our hearts and the willingness to act on it. And for that, I will always be grateful to her, this little girl who reminded us all of the power of true faith. And then, it happened. At first, there were just a few drops, soft and timid, barely noticeable against the cracked, thirsty earth. People stood still as if holding their breath, unsure if this was real. The first few drops fell, and they almost seemed like a mirage, a trick of hope on weary minds. But then, more raindrops began to fall, faster and heavier, filling the air with life. The rain poured harder and harder, as if the heavens themselves had opened up to release every drop they'd been holding back. It was as if all the longing, all the prayers, and all the unspoken dreams of the people had finally been answered, in a beautiful, overwhelming flood. The dry, parched earth began to soften under the rain, and the scent of wet soil filled the air, a scent of life, of renewal, of promises kept. In that moment, the entire village burst into joy. People rushed out of their homes, laughing, crying, their faces turned up to the sky. Old and young alike, they let the rain drench them, not caring about wet clothes or muddy feet. They danced, they sang, they hugged each other as if they'd been saved from the brink of despair. Some fell to their knees, hands lifted, their tears mixing with the rain. This wasn't just water falling from the sky. This was their salvation, their second chance. This was a gift they had almost stopped believing in. And then I saw her, that little girl, standing with her worn-out umbrella raised above her head. She stood there, with rain pouring all around her, holding that umbrella like it was a crown, her face bright with a smile that could light up the darkest night. Her eyes sparkled, and in that pure, unshakable gaze, there was a sense of satisfaction, of joy, of a victory that only she truly understood. She had known. In her heart, she had believed with such purity and certainty that no storm or drought could have taken that from her. And in that moment, with her simple umbrella, she was more than just a child. She was a symbol of hope, of the incredible power of faith, standing tall against everything that had tried to defeat it. Her father watched her, his own face streaked with rain and tears. I could see the weight of his worries lifting, replaced by a look of pride, of awe, as he realized the lesson his little girl had given them all. In her small act of faith, she had shown him, shown all of us, the strength of a heart that believes. And as the rain continued to fall, I looked around at my neighbors, at their faces filled with wonder and relief. We had all been changed. Each one of us, in that rain-drenched moment, understood that sometimes real strength doesn't come from what we can see or touch. It comes from the quiet, steady belief that carries us through the hardest of times. And for that, we had this little girl to thank. As I stood there, watching that little girl with her umbrella, a deep sense of understanding filled me. She had shown us all a truth so simple, yet so easy to overlook. Faith doesn't always need to be loud or grand. Sometimes it's as small as an old umbrella, held up against a dry, empty sky. Sometimes it's just one small gesture, but that can be enough to open doors, to change minds, to bring miracles. I began to realize that faith isn't about certainty, it's about trust. It's about holding on to hope, even when everything around you seems to say otherwise. Faith is that gentle whisper that says, believe and be ready, even when there's no proof that anything will change. This little girl reminded me, and everyone in the village, that true belief isn't just about hoping for something. It's about preparing, acting, as if that hope is already real. To each of you listening today, I hope this story can stay with you, the way it stayed with me. When life gets hard, when the future feels uncertain, and when doubt creeps in, remember this small act of faith from a child. Sometimes, the strength we need isn't about being brave or fearless. Sometimes, it's just about taking one small step forward, holding our faith close, and trusting that things will work out. Think about what you believe in. What dreams, goals, or hopes do you have that feel too far away or too difficult to reach? Take a step toward them. Act on them. Don't just hope, believe so deeply that you start making room for those dreams to become reality. Because sometimes, all we need to change our lives is to be ready. Ready for the moment when everything finally falls into place. So as you go about your life, remember, believe in what you wish for and act with that belief. Sometimes the only thing standing between you and the life you dream of is a small, quiet act of readiness, like carrying an umbrella in a sudden, unexpected rain. In the end, true faith isn't about seeing proof. It's about creating the space for miracles to happen. And if we can hold on to that, if we can live with even a fraction of the faith that little girl showed, then maybe, just maybe, we'll find our own lives touched by the very miracles we dared to believe in.